What's growing on, gardeners? It's Saturday, March 30th, and it is a gorgeous spring afternoon here on the southeastern coast of North Carolina. April is probably the most important month in all of gardening, and with so much to do, it can feel overwhelming at times. That's why on today's video, I'm going to simplify things and drill down to the 13 most important things that you would be crazy not to plant in April.
If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the bell to receive new video notifications, and check out our Amazon store and Spreadshop links in the video description for everything I use in my garden and awesome custom designed apparel and other gear. Your support is greatly appreciated.
Every month, I like to produce a video that shows you exactly what seeds you can be sowing at that time. But April is a little bit different. April is a month where I actually sow very few seeds. Most of what I'm doing in April is transferring plants out into the garden and planting other types of perennials. So believe it or not, April for me is not a big seed sowing month. I live on the southeastern coast of North Carolina, Zone 8B, so that should give you a decent idea as to where I am climate-wise. You may need to massage these dates in either direction depending on where you live and what your climate is like, but generally speaking, this is everything you should be doing out in your garden in April that is the most important, so you can focus on those most important things and not dwell on the minutia. So stay tuned, because this video is going to be much different than most gardening videos of this style. Plant number one that you'd be crazy not to plant in April are fruit trees. April is, generally speaking, the best time of year for most of us to plant our fruit trees. And while some gardeners may argue that actually fall planting is the best time to plant most fruit trees, the fact of the matter is the overwhelming majority of nurseries sell their trees in spring. So while there are a lot of merits to fall planting, it doesn't do you a whole lot of good if you can't get the fruit trees that you want. Now is the time to buy your fruit trees. Well, really, you should have reserved them months ago back in the winter, but if you did, you're getting your bare root fruit trees right now. So when I say that you should be planting your fruit trees right now, that means both bare root fruit trees and fruit trees that are evergreen or actively growing and have already leafed out. And the reason why spring is the best time of year to plant our fruit trees, aside from the whole part that that's when we can get most of our fruit trees, well, it's still nice and cool, and the fruit trees often haven't maintained full sap flow right now. So when you plant them before sap flow returns fully, that means the fruit trees will usually be under lower stress, and because the weather is milder, it's a lot easier to plant the trees because they won't suffer from drought stress like they will in summer. So what I have right here is a fruit tree that I just received in the mail this past week. This is a Betty peach, and it was provided to me by Rain Tree Nursery. My peach tree died last year, so they were kind enough to give me a brand new fruit tree to put in its place. So I will soon have a video on that. People ask me all the time, what is a good place to buy fruit trees online? I would definitely urge that you check out Rain Tree Nursery. I'll place a link to their website down in the video description. They have an enormous selection of fruit trees, other edibles, and ornamentals. The tree came quickly, it was expertly packed, and it is just a beautiful tree. This is a really nice fruit tree for the money. So if you're looking for a location to buy edibles, fruit trees, or just plants in general, definitely check out Rain Tree Nursery. Now, there is one small exception to this rule, and that is growers that live in Central and South Florida. Central and South Florida has a distinct dry season, wet season that the rest of the country doesn't really have. They have a long dry season that persists from the beginning of fall all the way until mid-spring, and it's actually notoriously difficult for growers to have trees established during that time. Some growers have better luck planting their trees during the rainy season because there's actually more cloud cover and there's a lot more rainfall, so it's easier for trees, especially tropical trees, to get established if you live all the way down there. That's probably a small portion of the audience watching this video, but I just wanted to throw that out there anyway. Plants 2, 3, and 4 that you would be crazy not to plant right now in April are your canes, your vines, and your bushes. And I'm going to specifically list blackberries, raspberries, tayberries, grapes, and blueberries. All of the plants that I just mentioned are extremely tolerant of cold temperatures, and they tend to wake up early in the spring, so it's a good idea to plant them as soon as possible. For example, this is a grapevine right here that I planted in fall that has woken up from dormancy and is beginning to bud out. Then over here I have my monster Mrs. Munson vine that I planted a year and a half ago. This thing is going to give me a really nice harvest this year. My blackberries are even further along. My Prime Arc Freedom blackberry that I planted 3 years ago, this thing is an absolute beast. It is in full bloom and it has already set numerous blackberries all throughout the plant. The younger blackberries that I planted behind it are also beginning to grow further and further along. This is another Prime Arc Freedom, that's why it is so far ahead. Then over here you have my raspberries that I planted last year, and they are already doing really well. They're waking up and coming to life. And my blueberries are even further along still. My blueberries are the first things to wake up, flower, and set fruit. As you can see, there are already hundreds and hundreds of fruits all over this blueberry bush, so get them in ground as soon as possible. The big box stores already have tons of these plants out and ready for purchase. A lot of times the canes for the raspberries and blackberries are actually indoors by the onions and seed potatoes. Plant number 5 that you would be crazy not to plant in April are your annual transplants. Now, in reality, this list could be 100 plants or more long, but I just want to break this down into a category to keep things simple. Now, for the overwhelming majority of the United States and the Northern Hemisphere in general, that will be our warm weather crops, like our nightshades, our tomatoes, our peppers, our eggplants, and our tomatillos. And it can also include our cucurbits, like our melons, our cucumbers, and our squash. All of those things, for most of us, can go out into our garden at some point during April. That's the beginning of April for a place like me on the southeastern Carolina coast. If you're north of me in the northeast or mid-Atlantic area, it may be late April. But most of us will be able to plant these things out into our garden at some point in April. But that being said, there are still tons of people that cannot get their warm season frost-sensitive plants out in April. But no matter where you live, everybody at this point in the year can plant their frost-tolerant annual transplants. So these are things like warm season lettuce. I have some nice romaine lettuce in this tray, and I also have some heat-tolerant broccoli and cauliflower. So these are going to go out into my garden right now, pretty much after I'm done this video. They're going to go out, and then when it starts getting really sunny in May, I'll just drop some shade cloth over them to stop them from bolting and extend my harvest. Some other examples of cool season transplants are kale, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, collard greens, chard. All of those things can go out into the garden pretty much no matter where you live right now. So even if it's still too cool out to plant your tomatoes, your peppers, and your cucumbers and things like that, you can still get those cool season transplants out into your garden. Plant number 6 that you'd be crazy not to plant in April is asparagus. Asparagus is one of those things that you want to get into the ground as soon as possible because it takes about 3 seasons for them to grow roots and before you can start picking your asparagus. But I'm telling you right now, it is worth every bit of the wait. Asparagus is so delicious right out of the garden. Even the thicker, fatter pieces of asparagus, they snap right off and they're as crunchy as a potato chip. They're so sweet. I don't even cook these things, I eat them raw. Just delicious. Now, asparagus is the very first perennial for me to break ground every single spring. I've actually been harvesting these asparagus for about a month now. And in my climate, I can plant them as early as February because they are so cold hardy. And the way that we plant these is we buy dormant asparagus crowns, we dig a trench, and we bury them underneath. And then the soil warms up and they'll eventually start breaking ground and forming roots. You'll want those roots to form for about 2 to 3 seasons to get big and strong before you start harvesting them significantly. Now, planting asparagus is extremely easy. I'll link to a video down in the video description and above that shows you exactly how to do that. It is well worth your time. They produce for 20 to 30 years, so once you plant them, they're basically going to feed you for an entire generation. So get them in the ground as soon as you can. Do not miss your window of opportunity. Now is when you should plant them. Crop number 7 that you'd be crazy not to plant in April are potatoes. Now, potatoes are part of the nightshade family, so they are closely related to tomatoes and peppers. They are not related to sweet potatoes, which are actually part of the morning glory family. More on sweet potatoes later in this video. Now, while potatoes are sensitive to frost and freeze that will kill the foliage, because they take about 2 to 3 weeks to break ground after you plant the potatoes, you actually want to sow them about 2 to 3 weeks before your last frost date because they prefer cool weather. Now, a few weeks ago, I showed you exactly how to plant potatoes in containers. I will link to that video above and below if you need a refresher or you missed it. But as you can see, the potatoes are already breaking ground and they are looking absolutely fantastic. Now, for me here in the coastal Carolinas, I prefer to sow my potatoes in mid-March. However, if you are around my area and you have not sowed your potatoes yet, it is not too late. Just get them in ground as soon as possible. If you're well north of me or you're well inland, now is the ideal time to plant your potatoes in many cases. All you need to do to plant potatoes is to have yourself some seed potatoes that have already sprouted. So you can go to the store and get some, you can go online and get some, or you can just check your pantry and see if any of your potatoes in the pantry have sprouted. If you see the eyes starting to sprout, they are fine to plant. It doesn't matter if they're organic or conventional. However, if you want the potatoes to sprout immediately and you don't have any that are sprouting, I recommend you get yourself some organic potatoes, because conventional potatoes are sometimes sprayed with a compound that slows the sprouting process. Once they've already sprouted, they're fine to plant, but if you need potatoes to sprout reliably more quickly, either go to the store and get some seed potatoes off the seed stand, or get organic potatoes from the grocery store and then put them on your countertop for 2 to 3 weeks and they will sprout. Crop number 8 that you'd be crazy not to sow in April are support flowers. Now, here on gardening channels, we often harp on the importance of food that we need to eat, but sometimes we miss out on telling you about all the awesome things that we plant around our food to support that food. And one of those things are a diversity of flowers, because flowers not only draw in pollinators, but sometimes they also draw in beneficial insects that eat the nasty bugs that we want to keep away, or they provide scents that smell off and can actually repel pests from our garden that are trying to locate and target the plants that they want to eat. Now, some examples of support flowers commonly grown in gardens are sunflowers, marigolds, nasturtiums, borage, alyssum, zinnias, but really the world is your oyster. Any kind of flower that you prefer is probably going to be beneficial. Now, the thing about planting flowers out into your garden is it usually takes flowers a shorter period of time to flower than the actual fruiting vegetables that we plant in our garden. So because of that, we usually want to sow our flowers after we actually sow the vegetables. So now is a good time to sow those flowers either directly out into our garden or in seed trays. Now, I just planted a whole bunch of these sunflowers out into my garden. I like to direct sow them, and I planted these about 5 days ago, and the first couple are just starting to break ground. Now, because sunflowers have such large seeds, they are great direct sown out into your garden as long as your soil temps are warm enough. But some of the smaller seeded flowers don't do too well because rain can wash away the really tiny seeds, so you may want to start them in seed trays. If it's too late in your climate to go out and sow flowers, you can also go to a local nursery and buy flowers. While vegetable garden transplants have gotten really expensive over the past few years, for whatever reason, flowers are still pretty cheap. So any flowers are going to be beneficial. If you want to go out and just buy 6-cell packs of different flowers and plant them around, hey, that's just fine too. Plants 9, 10, and 11 that you'd be crazy not to plant in April are actually the only seeds that I'm going to mention direct sowing in this video for vegetable crops, and that are your staple crops: peas, corn, and string beans. Now, right here you can see corn and string beans, but you don't see a packet for peas. That is because I already sowed my peas, because they are actually frost tolerant. So they went in a couple of weeks ago. However, the overwhelming majority of people can still grow peas out in their garden. And when I say peas, I'm talking specifically shelling peas, snap peas, and snow peas. Corn and string beans, on the other hand, you should plant out into your garden pretty much exactly at your last frost date. And while you can plant these as transplants and transplant them out into your garden, because these work so well direct sown, I really recommend you do that and you save a step. So like I said, plant the seeds directly in ground right around your last frost date, and that will give you a natural buffer because they will take about 10 days or so to break ground. So if you were to get a late frost a few days after your last frost date, you're pretty much still covered. Now, what I have noticed is that corn and string beans do tend to struggle in the peak summer when things get really hot, at least here on the southeastern Carolina coast. So I like to get them out into the garden as soon as possible to try and beat the heat. If you direct sow your string beans right now, now, you will probably be harvesting them in mid-June before things get really nasty in July. And as for the corn, the harvest is going to be depending on the maturity date of the corn. Early corn is going to obviously be a lot earlier than a late season corn, but that being said, in the middle of summer we start getting a lot more corn worms and pests that cause damage. So if you can get out ahead of those pests and have the harvest before the worms really start becoming a problem, that is just great. Corn also takes a lot of water to grow, so if you get the corn seeds in as early as possible, you can save on irrigation costs. Plant 12 that you would be crazy not to start in April are going to be any second wave crops that you want out in your garden. Now, when I say second wave crops, what do I mean? Well, I've found that it's generally a waste of time to try and keep some of your disease and pest susceptible annual vegetables alive all throughout the whole summer. It's just not going to happen in pest and disease heavy pressure environments. So what I do is, for some of my crops, especially ones that fruit quickly, I plant second, sometimes third or fourth waves out into my garden. Now, two crops I tend to do that with are squash and cucumbers. I plant them out in waves every 6 weeks or so. So I'll plant out my first wave of cucumbers and squash in April, thinking that they'll probably be dead by late June. So I like to get another crop out probably at the end of April, beginning of May. And in order to do that, I will need to sow more cucumber and squash seeds at some point during this month, probably within the next 2 or 3 weeks. Now, this technique is called succession planting. I like to have different waves of plants in all different ages because young plants are more fruitful, more disease resistant, and more insect resistant than older plants. So always have younger plants out into your garden. And hey, look, I just noticed something right here. I have my first strawberry of the year. It is March 30th and we are already picking strawberries here on the Carolina coast. Probably could have used another day, but I was so excited I had to pick it. If your growing season is long enough, you can succession crop pretty much any individual plant that you want, given enough time in the year. I also like to plant a second wave of tomatoes for the fall. It's a little too early to start any seeds for them yet in my climate, but I probably will actually at the end of May. And lucky crop number 13 that you would be crazy not to plant in April are sweet potatoes. Now, as I previously mentioned, sweet potatoes are actually not a potato. They are not in the same family. Sweet potatoes are actually part of the morning glory family. They are not a nightshade like a typical traditional potato is. However, because of this, they are extremely tropical, and they are actually the last annual that I plant out into my garden every single year. I don't plant my sweet potatoes out into my garden until at some point in May because they don't like being outside until the nighttime temperatures are comfortably and consistently above 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. They hate the cool weather. So because of that, like I said, they're the last things I put out into my garden. And what you plant are actually the slips of the sweet potato. What you'll do is you'll break off a node of each vine and plant them directly out into your garden. This is an Okinawan sweet potato that I overwintered from last winter, so it's already vining out like crazy. However, just a few days ago, I started planting my sprouting sweet potatoes up in my office on a seedling heat mat underneath grow lights. They will take about 6 weeks to 8 weeks to really get going and produce vines. So because of that, you really want to start these as soon as possible to develop those vines. But like I said, I don't put my sweet potatoes out until the middle of May. So if you're north or west of me, you probably won't need to put them out until the end of May, June 1st or so. So that's why you still have time to start your sweet potato slips. If you have any questions about starting sweet potato slips, I have the most comprehensive video on the entire internet about it. I'll link to it above and down below in the video description. And that right there are 13 plants that you would be crazy not to start in April. Now, like I said, these 13 plants are actually more like 13 categories. This could be 1,000 different plants. But what I tried to do was I tried to condense things and simplify them by breaking them into categories because we just can't plant every single thing there is underneath the sun. We have to prioritize. So hopefully this will help prioritize your schedule so you can do what's most important and maximize your growing season. So everybody, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and please please ring that notification bell so you're notified when I release more videos like these. If you have any questions about any of the different plants that I mentioned in this video, ask questions down in the comments below and I will do my best to address them. I also place lots of links in the video description to different planting tutorials that will show you how to start these various crops. If you're curious about any of the products that I use in real life to grow everything I grow in my garden, they're all linked down in my Amazon storefront link in the video description. So expand the video description, click on the Amazon link, you'll see everything I use in real life. And while you're down there, check out my spread shop for custom merch if you want to support the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video. Dale and I are out enjoying our walk on this beautiful, beautiful day. And sometimes I have to remind myself, when you're Dale, you just have to stop and smell the roses, right, buddy? Is that, oh, sometimes you have to pee on the roses too, I guess. Right, buddy? Oh, we enjoy our walks together. He's sniffing so much he's got a spit string on his nose. Look at you. Come on, buddy. We're almost home.